A failure like you doesn't deserve Dad's inheritance, my sister mocked at the will reading. He'd be ashamed of what you became. Everyone nodded. I just left. 72 hours later, they all regretted their words. Hey everyone! Before we dive in, I have a quick favor to ask. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. The tension in Silas's office was suffocating. Maybe it was the mahogany walls closing in, or the weight of Dad's empty leather chair still pushed against his desk like he just stepped out for coffee. My sister Camila kept checking her watch, the same nervous tick she'd had since we were kids, when she'd count seconds until Dad came home to review our report cards. I wasn't supposed to be here today. The email from Silas caught me off guard last night. Charles specifically requested your presence. 3 years of silence since I left the family business, and now this, my own father's will reading. Let us begin. Silas cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, the same ones he wore at every family dinner for the past 20 years. Charles was very specific about how this should proceed. Mom sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't said much since Dad passed, but her eyes followed me when I walked in. There was something there. Worry? Relief? I couldn't tell. Josephine, my younger sister, was typing away on her phone, probably updating her office about another delayed morning. She'd made partner last year, the youngest in her firm's history. Dad had been so proud he bought her a Mercedes first. Silas began. Charles wanted me to read this letter. He pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges. My heart stopped when I recognized Dad's handwriting. He'd always insisted on writing everything by hand, even in the age of emails and text messages. To my family, Silas read, if you're hearing this, I finally ran out of time to fix my mistakes, and I've made many. Camila straightened in her chair. She'd been running Dad's company since his diagnosis, keeping everything exactly as he would have wanted, or so she thought. My greatest regret, Silas continued, is letting my pride overshadow my understanding. Success isn't measured by the path you follow, but by the courage to forge your own. I felt everyone's eyes shift to me. 3 years ago, I'd walked away from my VP position at Dad's company to start my own tech venture. He'd called it a betrayal, said I was throwing away generations of legacy for a pipe dream. We barely spoke after that. The letter went on about family values and legacy, but I was stuck on that line about courage. Dad had never used that word to describe my choices before. Then came the details. The company's shares went to Camila, no surprise there. She'd been groomed for this her whole life. Josephine got the family properties and investment portfolios. Mom got the house and her existing trusts. And to my son, Ian. Silas paused, adjusting his glasses again. Just get on with it, Camila snapped. We all know Ian gave up his right to anything substantial when he abandoned the family. Actually, Silas continued, Charles left Ian his private study, including all contents, documents, and personal effects. The room went silent. Dad's study had been his sanctuary for 40 years. None of us were ever allowed inside without his presence. Even Mom hadn't gone in there since he passed. That's it, Josephine laughed. A room full of old papers. A failure like you doesn't deserve Dad's inheritance anyway. Camila stood up, her voice sharp. He'd be ashamed of what you became, walking away from everything he built for some ridiculous startup dream. Everyone nodded, except Mom. She was staring at her hands, a slight tremor in her fingers. Charles was very specific, Silas added. The study must remain untouched until Ian takes possession. No one else is to enter. This is ridiculous, Camila spat. Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end. We all know that. Ian abandoned everything. He doesn't deserve. I stood up quietly. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, cutting through Camila's rant. Without a word, I walked to the door. That's right. Run away again, Josephine called after me. It's what you do best. I paused at the doorway, my hand on the handle. Through the window, I could see Dad's old parking spot, empty now. He used to park his car at an angle, claiming it was lucky. Small memories like that hit harder than the big ones. Silas, I said without turning around, when can I collect the study key? Tomorrow morning, he replied. Was there a hint of something in his voice? Anticipation? Ian, don't you dare, Camila started. I closed the door behind me, cutting off her words. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Dad's study, the one place in his world he never let anyone control but himself. My phone buzzed. A text from my technical co-founder. Hey, got that meeting with potential investors lined up. They're interested in the prototype. When can you review the pitch deck? I smiled slightly, pushing off the wall. Dad's study could wait until tomorrow. Right now, I had a company to run. What I didn't know then was that Dad's useless inheritance would change everything. But that's a story for tomorrow, after I see what 40 years of my father's secrets look like. Update 1 first. Thank you all for the supportive comments on my last post. I didn't expect it to blow up like that. A lot of you asked for an update about Dad's study, so here it is. The key felt heavier than it should have. I stood outside Dad's study door at 7 a.m., coffee in hand, staring at the brass handle like it might bite. Mom was still asleep. She'd taken to sleeping late since Dad passed. The house was quiet, except for the old grandfather clock in the hallway, ticking away like nothing had changed. I turned the key. The lock clicked, echoing in the empty hallway. The door swung open with a familiar creak. Dad had always refused to oil the hinges, saying it was his built-in alert system for when we tried to sneak in as kids. The study looked exactly as he'd left it. Dark leather sofa against the wall, worn smooth in the spot where he used to sit. Bookshelves stretching floor to ceiling, organized in his peculiar system that only he understood. His reading glasses still perched on the desk next to a half-empty coffee mug with a lipstick stain. Mom must have brought him his last cup here. I set my coffee down and walked to his desk. The leather chair still held the impression of his shape. I ran my hand over the smooth mahogany surface, remembering all the times I'd stood on the other side, reporting my grades, my career plans, my decision to leave. That's when I noticed it, the corner of something poking out from under his desk calendar. I lifted the calendar and my heart stopped. It was a printout of my company's website, recently dated, just 2 weeks before he passed. Red pen marks covered the margins, notes in his distinctive scroll, smart approach to market entry, novel solution to scaling issues, potential partnership opportunity. My hands were shaking as I lifted the calendar completely. Underneath lay a stack of documents, market research reports, competitor analyses, financial projections, all about my startup, all annotated in Dad's handwriting. In the bottom drawer, behind his usual files, I found a leather-bound journal. The first entry was dated the day after I left the family business. Ian walked away today. Camila says he's lost his mind. Josephine agrees, but I remember being 29, wanting to build something of my own. I was too much of a coward then, followed my father's path instead. Maybe the entry trailed off. I flipped through more pages. He'd been tracking my company's progress, making notes, analyzing our strategy, not like a disappointed father, but like an interested investor. My phone buzzed. Camila, Mom says you're in the study. Don't touch anything until our lawyers review the will. We're contesting it. I ignored it, continuing to dig through the desk. In the side drawer, I found a USB drive labeled Ian Strategy Review 2024. My laptop was in my bag. I plugged it in. The drive contained folders, years of research about emerging technology trends, market analyses, and video files. I clicked on the most recent one. Dad's face filled the screen. He looked tired, recorded this just days before, but his eyes were sharp. Ian, if you're watching this, I guess I ran out of time to say this in person. Your sisters think I was angry when you left. Truth is, I was scared. Scared you'd succeed where I failed. Scared you had the courage I never did. He coughed, took a sip of water. But I've been watching. You're building something remarkable. Something that could change everything. Not just for you, but for the whole family business. In the bottom left drawer, there's a false panel. The combination is your mother's birthday. What you'll find there, well, let's just say I didn't keep all my eggs in one basket. My phone buzzed again. Josephine this time. Ian, be reasonable. You know Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Let's talk about a fair settlement. I found the panel. Mom's birthday. May 12th, 1962. Inside was a thick folder labeled Contingency Strategy 2024 and stock certificates. I started reading. 3 hours later, I finally looked up. My coffee was cold, untouched. The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows across Dad's desk. My phone showed 15 missed calls. Camila, Josephine, their lawyers. But none of that mattered. What Dad had left behind wasn't just a room full of memories. It was a blueprint. While everyone thought he was just a traditionalist stuck in his ways, he'd been quietly preparing for a future he knew was coming. A future where my ridiculous startup dream wasn't just compatible with the family legacy, it was essential to its survival. The doorbell rang downstairs, probably Camila with her lawyers. Let them come. I needed a few more hours to process what I'd found, to understand the full scope of Dad's plan. One thing was clear. The inheritance they thought was worthless. It was about to change everything. And Dad? He hadn't been disappointed in me at all. He'd been counting on me. My phone buzzed one more time. A text from Mom. He spent every evening in here after you left, you know. Said he was studying the future. Now I understand what he meant. Be careful with your sisters, honey. But be brave, too. I looked at Dad's empty coffee mug, at the stack of documents that showed years of silent support, at the strategy he'd crafted that wove my path back into the family legacy without forcing me to abandon my dreams. Tomorrow, I deal with the lawyers. Tonight, I had a lot of reading to do. Dad had left me a roadmap, and I was starting to see where it led. Just got a message from Silas. Your father asked me to tell you when the time came. The future belongs to those who build it. He made me promise to wait until you found everything in the study. I think I finally understand what he meant. And Camila, Josephine, they're about to understand too. More updates to come. Things are about to get interesting. Update 2. Sorry for the delay between posts. The last 2 weeks have been intense. A lot of you asked what I found in Dad's study and what happened with my sisters. Here's where things stand. I was reviewing Dad's files in his study for the third straight night when Mom brought me coffee. She stopped in the doorway, hand trembling slightly as she held out the mug. "You look just like him," she said quietly, sitting there with all those papers spread out, trying to solve some puzzle only you can see. The puzzle was bigger than any of us had imagined. Dad's research wasn't just about my company. It was about transforming our entire family legacy. While everyone thought he was stubbornly clinging to tradition, he'd been quietly preparing for massive industry changes that would make most traditional institutions obsolete. "Your sisters are here," Mom said, setting down the coffee. "They're in the kitchen. No lawyers this time." I found Camila and Josephine at the breakfast table, looking uncomfortable in the morning light. The kitchen smelled like Mom's cinnamon rolls, her way of trying to make peace since we were kids. "We need to talk," Camila said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "about the company's quarterly results." I sat down, saying nothing. "Let them show their cards first." Josephine slid a tablet across the table. The numbers were bad, really bad. The traditional market was shifting faster than anyone had predicted, except Dad. His notes had outlined this exact scenario, along with a strategy to navigate it. "We're hemorrhaging clients," Camila admitted. "They're moving to newer, more agile competitors. The board is getting nervous." Her watch-checking tick was back, worse than ever. "And you think that's why Dad left me the study?" I said. "Because my ridiculous startup dream might save the family business?" "Don't be smug," Josephine snapped. "We're trying to be reasonable here." I pulled out Dad's strategy document, dated 2 years ago. "Did you know Dad had been preparing for this? That he'd been developing a complete transformation strategy?" Their blank faces answered that question. "He knew the market was changing," I continued. "That's why he was so interested in my company. Not because he was disappointed, but because he saw how it could be integrated with our traditional business to create something entirely new." I showed them the annotated reports, the market analyses, the transformation strategy, Dad's meticulous research into emerging trends, his notes on potential synergies between old and new approaches. "Why didn't he tell us?" Camila's voice was small, unlike her usual confident tone. "Because he wanted us to figure it out ourselves," Mom said from the doorway. We all turned. None of us had heard her come in. "He always said the best lessons are the ones you learn on your own." She sat down with us, something different in her demeanor. "Your father spent hours talking about this, how the industry was changing, how proud he was of each of you in different ways. Camila's dedication to tradition, Josephine's sharp mind for strategy, Ian's courage to innovate. He saw how all of those qualities would be needed." "The stock certificates in the hidden panel," I said. "They're not just random investments. They're strategic positions in key technologies we'll need for the transformation. Dad wasn't just planning for the company's survival, he was planning for its evolution." Josephine picked up one of Dad's research reports, her legal training showing as she quickly processed the information. This could actually work. The integration points are clearly defined, the regulatory considerations are addressed. But the board will never approve such a radical change. Camila, too conservative. I smiled for the first time. "Check the voting rights analysis in the blue folder." They did. Dad had spent years quietly consolidating voting rights, building a position that would let us push through major changes, if we worked together. Together? Camila looked skeptical. "After everything." "Dad's letter," I reminded them. "Success isn't measured by the path you follow, but by the courage to forge your own." He wasn't just talking about me. Mom stood up, gathering empty coffee mugs. "Charles always said his greatest achievement wasn't the business. It was having 3 children stubborn enough to fight for what they believed in, even if that meant fighting each other sometimes." The kitchen fell quiet, except for the soft clink of Mom loading the dishwasher. Such a normal sound in such a pivotal moment. "The board meets next week," Camila finally said. "If we're going to do this, we'll need to be prepared." Josephine finished. "The strategy is solid, but the execution has to be perfect." I pulled out my laptop. "I have some ideas about that." Dad left pretty detailed notes about the integration process. We spent the next few hours around that kitchen table, empty cinnamon roll plate between us, building something new from Dad's legacy, not just preserving it, but evolving it into something he'd seen coming long before any of us. Silas stopped by that afternoon with more documents from Dad's files. He smiled when he saw us all working together. "Charles said to give you this when you figured it out." He handed me an envelope, said you'd know when the time was right. Inside was a single page in Dad's handwriting. I'll share what it said in my next update, after the board meeting. Things are moving fast now, and what we're building goes way beyond what any of us imagined. Mom was right. Dad's real legacy wasn't the business. It was teaching us how to build something together, even if we had to fall apart first to see it. The board meeting is in 3 days. We'll need every minute to prepare. More updates soon. Finally, update. What a week. You might have seen the news about the unprecedented shakeup at our company. Here's what really happened. The morning of the board meeting, I found Camila in Dad's study, standing by his desk. She was holding his old coffee mug, the one with the lipstick stain from Mom's last visit. "I never understood why he spent so much time in here," she said quietly. "I thought he was just hiding from the changes happening outside. I was wrong about a lot of things." The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. By 9:30, the room was filled with familiar faces. Board members who'd known us since we were kids, who'd nodded along with every tradition, who'd clucked their tongues disapprovingly when I left to start my company. I set up my laptop while Josephine arranged the presentation materials. Dad's final letter sat in my pocket, still unopened. "Not yet," he'd written on the envelope. "Wait until after the meeting started." Exactly as Dad's notes predicted. Old guard resistance, concerns about tradition, subtle implications that we were too young to understand the business. I let them talk. The longer they went on, the more they proved our point. Then I pulled up the numbers. Not just the recent losses, the complete analysis Dad had prepared, showing the inevitable decline of traditional models. The room got quieter. Next came Josephine, with the legal framework demonstrating how our competitors were already moving into position. More silence. Finally, Camila stood up. The board leaned forward. They expected their traditional ally. Instead, she laid out the transformation strategy point by point, showing how my tech company's innovation could revolutionize our core business. That's when the real fireworks started. "This is absurd," Bernard, Dad's old friend and board member, sputtered. "Charles would never." I pulled out the folder of Dad's research. Actually, this entire strategy came from Dad. He spent the last 3 years planning it. The look on their faces, watching decades of assumptions crumble in real time. But we weren't done. Remember those stock certificates from Dad's hidden panel? Turns out he'd been quietly buying up shares through various entities for years. As Josephine explained the voting rights analysis, I watched the color drain from Bernard's face. "Even if you have the votes," he tried, "you'll never get the institutional investors on board." I smiled and clicked to the next slide. Actually, we already did. Dad's strategic positions included partnerships with key investors. They're not just on board, they're enthusiastic. That's when Mom walked in. The board members straightened up instinctively. They'd always been a bit afraid of her quiet authority. "Charles knew this day was coming," she said, taking her seat. "He prepared for it. The only question is whether you gentlemen want to be part of the future or part of the past." The vote wasn't even close. By noon, the old guard was out. The transformation plan was approved. Our family would maintain control, but with a new direction. My tech company would be integrated as the innovation arm, with Camila leading traditional operations and Josephine handling strategy. But the real moment came after the meeting, in Dad's study. We finally opened his last letter together. "To my children, if you're reading this, you've finally seen what I've known all along. That true legacy isn't about preserving the past, but building the future. Each of you has a gift: Camila's strength, Josephine's wisdom, Ian's vision. Apart, you're formidable. Together, you're unstoppable. The old guard never understood that tradition without innovation is just slow decay. They'll fight you. Let them. Their resistance proves they need to go. Ian, your failure was actually your greatest success. You showed the courage I wished I'd had at your age. Camila, your dedication to our legacy is admirable, but legacy isn't static. It grows, evolves, transforms. Josephine, your analytical mind saw the patterns. Now help your siblings build something new from them. The study wasn't just a room full of memories. It was your proving ground, the place where you'd either come together or fall apart forever. I'm proud of you all. Love, Dad. The news hit that afternoon. The stock jumped 30% on the announcement. Bernard and his allies tried to fight back through the press, but Mom just released decades of Dad's research showing how they'd resisted every innovation, nearly running the company into the ground. They resigned within days. Turns out Dad had also kept detailed records of their more questionable decisions over the years. As Mom said, the best revenge is showing them how irrelevant they've become. Today, 6 months later, our integrated company is revolutionizing the industry. The old guard who mocked my startup dream watch from the sidelines as their own companies scramble to catch up. Camila and Josephine, we have lunch in Dad's study every week, planning the future he knew we could build. Mom joins sometimes, smiling as we argue and collaborate in equal measure. The coffee mug with Mom's lipstick stain still sits on Dad's desk. We keep it there to remind us that the greatest legacies aren't the ones you preserve, they're the ones you transform. That's the real inheritance Dad left us. Not the company, not the strategy, but the understanding that family legacy is something you build together, even if you have to break it apart first to build it stronger. The old guard who called me a failure? They're welcome to watch us succeed from the retirement homes they were forced into after our takeover exposed their decades of incompetence. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so successful, they have to watch helplessly as you leave them in the dust. Dad would have liked that. Final edit. Final edit. Thank you all for following this journey. Some asked about a follow-up, but this feels like the right place to end it. The future's looking bright, and we've got work to do. Like today's story? A super thanks helps me keep bringing you the best daily content. Your support means I can keep doing what I love. Thanks for being awesome.